Welcome, everybody, to the Global DNA series, Creating Genetics and Freedom. Today's title is Heal and Transform Your Life with Regenix. And we are joined with Sol Luckman. And Sol is an award-winning international best-selling author of humor, fiction, and nonfiction, as well as a pioneering painter whose work has appeared on mainstream book covers. And he also wrote the book, Potentiate Your DNA. So thank you so much for joining us, Sol.
Thanks for having me.
It's so wonderful to finally connect with you and to I've read your book and I've been a part of some of the ceremonies that you have going on, and I think you're doing some really great stuff. So it's such a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, well, I was really happy to get your invitation. It was kind of out of the blue, and so I'm glad we could make this happen. We keep getting a little bit of a delay, so hopefully it'll work itself out.
Awesome. Yeah, I hope so too. So let's talk about what were some of the experiences that led you to working with DNA? Um, what parts like really started captivating you that you were like, okay, this is kind of where I need to go for a little while and be with this?
Yeah, I was really sick. I'd gotten sick from having some travel jabs, and then I got into a really horrific, nearly decade-long kind of autoimmune crash. And I began, well, I tried so many things that didn't really help me at all, and I had lots of dead ends that I went down. But I eventually got into energy types of healing protocols, like qigong, for example. And then I was doing work with allergy elimination technique, and that helped me a little bit with some of my many weird food and environmental allergies. And I pestered my teacher, my practitioner in allergy elimination technique, to teach me how to do what she was doing. She was doing her own version. It was kind of a an evolution of Ellen Cutler's bioset technology that she had developed. And so I began doing that work with people, and began doing a lot of kinesiology, muscle testing on all kinds of clients who came through. It was a very busy clientele practice that we had. And I I was happy with that work for a while, and I felt like I was making progress. And then I think I just burnt out my nervous system doing all these nervous system clearings, essentially, and I started losing ground again. And when I would talk with my teacher, she was really she was really generous to teach me, but then she was very protective of her information in a lot of ways, and she was kind of a gatekeeper and wouldn't let me ask questions about things that I really wanted to ask questions about, like the relationship between energy and DNA, or sound and DNA, and how do we maybe clear at the genetic level and that kind of thing. And it was basically just taboo. And so I don't know what her hang up was with that exactly, but I whenever someone tells me no like that, that's a yes, as far as I'm concerned. So I started really delving into this a lot, and had, all kinds of serendipitous happenings and shamanic encounters, and uh, chance meetings with people who gave me little tidbits or taught me a lot at one time, connections with odd people in mystery schools who downloaded a lot of information. Many things happened. And so I followed this kind of breadcrumb trail, this yellow brick road, into the relationship between specifically sound and DNA. I got into Jeremy Narby's work, Cosmic Serpent, all of that, and ended up going on a trip back to Brazil, where I had gone when I got the jabs the first time. I went with my partner Lee, and she was an integral part of developing Regenetics. I was very sick at the time. I'd lost a lot of ground. I was very thin. I thought maybe I was dying. I said goodbye to my family as if maybe that was really goodbye. We traveled down there. We had some absolutely mystical, strange experiences. I've been called a contactee based on them. I'm not sure that that's how I would phrase it. In fact, if I was contacted by anything, I tend to think it was my higher self, but that's maybe another discussion. Long story short, that contact with this consciousness, or this aspect of my own consciousness, allowed myself and Lee to download these healing codes in the form of vowels that were based in sound and light. that we were told to chant and think in a certain way. And when we did, I started getting better. And she also experienced very dramatic improvement in areas that had troubled her, like asthma and scoliosis. And that was the beginning of our journey of developing this work further and beginning to offer it to other people. We before terribly long, we were down in Brazil still, but we had a bunch of clients back in the States, and we were saying, we think this will work at a distance, so we'll try it. And we did, and they began having all these crazy wonderful experiences, and that was the beginning of this journey.
That's so beautiful. The two books that changed my life when I was in high school was The Serpent Code and by Narby, and also The Holographic Universe. And I had no idea what those two books were going to mean to me in as my adult life on my spiritual path of understanding my soul and inside this body. And The Serpent Code led me to spend many years in the jungles of Peru, and that's such a great book.
Yeah, I mean, are we talking about the same book? There's the Cosmic Serpent. Is that the one you're
Cosmic
thinking
Serpent,
of?
sorry, it's The Cosmic Serpent.
So yeah, because that's subtitled DNA and the Origins of Knowledge.
Yeah, yeah,
And,
yeah.
and yeah, I love that book, and I love Talbot's book. I mean, certainly the Holographic Universe is one of the great classics. And every once in a while I'll dip back into that book, and there's always something that stands out anew, as if I'd never read it or never understood it the first time. So that's how you know it's a good book.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about what wh- where you're at right now with using sound, and kind of like what your experience has been. Say helping people heal their genetics, but also maybe restructuring genetics.
Yeah, I mean, I know that there are lots of wild claims out there in the DNA activation community, and I really don't believe most of them or any of them really, to be honest. But I think what we can do is we can speed up the epigenetic process by using what I call metagenetics. So we can go into the non-local realm, and we can use sound and thought, which are basically just forms that manifest into forms of torsion energy that I believe go over into our blueprint, our subtle body energy blueprint, and can heal distortions in our energy field. And that can then flow back in through our DNA, through perhaps the junk part of the DNA, and help us turn on and off genes to facilitate healing outcomes. So that really is a kind of like usage of a non-local environment to create epigenetic changes non-locally. It's
Mhm.
not, it's not, I believe, some kind of radical rewriting of genetics.
Mhm.
And I just have not seen any real evidence of that kind of radical rewriting. Although I believe, I still believe that it's possible. I write in my first book, Conscious Healing, about something that one biochemist named Colm Kelleher called a transposition burst, where, if you were activating your light body or something like that, which, again, no real evidence for me of that phenomenon in real time in my life. But I theorized that if you do that, you, along with Colm Kelleher, that this would necessitate a massive rearrangement of the on and off signals in your genes. And
Absolutely.
that would certainly be detectable at a very coarse level.
Absolutely. I believe in the power of our consciousness to change our genetics. And I believe that how we act in our daily lives and the things that we think and how we treat ourselves changes the epigenetic patterns of what is happening.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, epigenetics, you have people like Bruce Lipton and a lot of other people. Elizabeth Sartoris has been writing about this stuff for a long time. She's a wonderful biologist. That's indisputable. But I think where things are going is in this greater power, sort of something outside of our individual minds and our individual environments. Call it source, call it time space, call it the etheric or astral realm. People have all kinds of names for it, and sometimes they're very contradictory. But I believe that we can access that realm for healing. I also believe that's where we sort of holographically project out of. So we're going back to the projector, as it were, and we're maybe fine tuning, or maybe the projector has a lens defect or something like that, and we're brushing that off, and that's healing the distortions in that holographic baseline that then allows us to manifest not only a healthier body and mind, psyche, but also healthier life circumstances, because we're also raising our energy field, our vibration, our what I like to call attractor fields, so that we change our lives in very outward ways in relationship to our careers and our relationships and other outcomes. I see that all the time with Regenetics. People have profoundly changing transformational experiences that go far beyond just getting over some symptom or some diagnosis.
Absolutely, absolutely. So what is your experience of tractor fields? Like how would you describe that for people?
Yeah, the way I look at it is that like attracts like in many ways. I know that people say that opposites attract, but really, I believe that that a low energy field attracts lower outcomes.
Yeah.
And that can manifest in physical disease. It can manifest in mental illness, or for a variety of things. And it can also manifest in poverty and that kind of thing. You're really talking about a kind of consciousness level. I mean, you could look into things like power versus force and that kind of thing to understand maybe where, where I'm coming from in terms of the mind's ability to manifest a higher vibration. But
Mhm.
I'm also going beyond the idea of the mind and saying that our DNA and our connection to source that's manifesting through our DNA can help us maintain a higher vibration when we reset it. And that's what Regenetics is all about, is actually resetting that relationship with our blueprint. And once
Beautiful.
that's done, you don't have to sit around doing affirmations or even trying to be positive or anything like that. It is a natural benefit of resetting the blueprint.
Yeah, it becomes your beingness. It's not a doing anymore.
Yeah, so we use the word being or beingness. We use the word unfoldment to talk about the process of how that beingness shows up in your life, because it's not always instantaneous. Although sometimes there can be instant karma, where it's like all of a sudden just things clear up, and maybe they do so dramatically. Like you get this work and you go out and you lose the job you always hated anyway, and the next day you're offered the job you always wanted anyway. So we've seen it all in terms of that.
Yeah, I believe in the power of consciousness, and I also believe in the power of rewriting our patterns. And so, if you have a pattern that you've lived in your life that has led you to be in a certain system, a pattern of living, that it's important that you create yourself out of that. It's important that you consciously, every moment of every day, make choices and decisions to repattern the energetic field around you and through the DNA, in order that you can then emit a different type of energy, and then have different types of holographic projections that you're working through your DNA. And I'm a firm believer in that. We can't just say we want something. It's important to take action for that, the new creation of that.
Yeah, well said. I guess what I would like to just clarify for people listening is that, maybe we should look at three approaches to interacting with DNA. In my book, Potentiate Your DNA, I use Dr. Larry Dossey's scaffolding of eras 1, 2, and 3 of medicine to look at how we have sort of learned about DNA and then how to interact with DNA. So era 1, according to Dossey, was the materialistic era. And that would correspond to the era of genetics. And in that era, you're looking at the primacy of DNA and the idea of genetic diseases. DNA is a kind of molecule. We have to interact with it chemically. End of story, right?
The
Or
actual
we have to
structure of what's
chemify what.
happening. Yeah.
Right. So then era 2, and that would be the era of body medicine, right? And then we went into mind body medicine, and that is era 2, and that's epigenetics, where our minds interact with our environments. And so we're not looking at the primacy of DNA anymore. We're looking at the primacy of the cell membrane, the brain being in the membrane. That's a Lipton way of looking at the DNA and the cell.
Mhm.
And that protein in the membrane is constantly interacting with the environment and is essentially running the show from an epigenetic standpoint. So epigenetics is an environmental type of medicine, and the environment can also be your mind, your thoughts, your attitudes, the EMFs around you. It doesn't have to just be a physical, 5 sense type of environment. It can be the invisible aspects of your environment to a large degree. Era 3 is the real frontier here, according to Dossi. Even he calls it Era 3 or non-local medicine, and he cites as a supreme example of this prayer. Prayer is his major example. He wrote a book called Healing Words that is all about this, and there are many studies that show the power of prayer, however you want to define that, on health, on people's health and just their lives in general. So what for me in Potentiate Your DNA, I said that we've now gone from era 1 to era 2 to era 3. Like he's saying, we're in non-local medicine, and it's no longer the primacy of DNA. It's no longer the primacy of the environment. Now it's the primacy of consciousness.
Absolutely.
So that's where we are. So the exploration here in the greater energy healing and DNA activation community should be into the power of our consciousness in a non-local sense, meaning not just sitting around doing affirmations, etc., but literally tapping into something much greater than our individual minds to achieve real, actually radical feats of healing and transformation.
Absolutely. The body epigenetics that you talked about in the phase 2, to me, is like the bioenergetic relationships, like communication of the bioenergetic relationships, and then the non-local is really us consciously using our words to speak vibration, to have visions and to speak vibrations of our highest potential as an active consciousness.
Yeah, right on, right on. So we move from body medicine to mind-body medicine to mind-body spirit medicine.
Love it. Amen.
Right, that's right.
So let's talk about how sound, your work with sound and the electromagnetic fields, how that actually repatterns DNA, and like what are some of the things that you've seen, that when you are using the sound, we'll say invocations, the sound frequencies, what do people start experiencing inside their DNA?
Well, let me reverse what you said just for clarity. Really, it's the DNA that's repatterning the energy field,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's the starting point. So in the Regenetics model, we live in a place called space-time. And then there is an inverse reality right beside us that we can't see typically, and it's called time-space. This comes out of the work of Dewey Larson, who was a wonderfully gifted and brilliant engineer. And in the late 50s, he wrote a series of books on what he called reciprocal system of physical theory. And it is basically the elaboration of a theory of a unified field that exists between space-time and time-space, and then time-space and space-time. It keeps flowing around and around and around and around and around that circle. At the pure physical level, I would suggest that the interface between those two realms would just be the atom, this vibrational construct. And so it's constantly being fed energy by time space, and then it appears to materialize in our hologram, and that's space time. And then our energy then flows back into time space. The funny thing is that there are also people living over in time space. And for those people, we are the energy field. So
Absolutely.
we
Yeah.
have another one of us over in time space according to this model, that is our energy body. But that energy body is also having a life of its own, and we are that person's energy body.
Absolutely. That's why I feel a lot of times when people have contact experiences that they're really having contact experiences with different dimensional levels of themselves.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you can look at it dimensionally. The thing about this theory is that you really don't need the dimensions. You just need that other reality, which is on your same dimension.
Mhm.
So
Okay,
it's basically 3D space time meets 3D time space.
got it.
Now,
Yeah.
yes, you could get downloads from a higher dimension if such things exist, and we could talk about that. I mean, I have a lot of evolving thoughts on that whole subject. I think in some ways I'm becoming more of a materialist as time goes by. But anyway, um, the the idea here is that at the biological level, DNA is the connection point between space time and time space.
Mhm.
So when we can speak to our DNA, we can instruct it to go over into time space and to rearrange the blueprint.
Absolutely.
At its most extreme, you might be able to do something like Garayev and Popponen in wave genetics and take a salamander or a frog embryo, speak to its DNA, and tell it to change into the other one. So a frog becomes a salamander or vice versa.
Yeah, absolutely.
At
Um,
the most extreme, but in what I see with regenetics, you're basically healing distortions in the blueprint. You're repatterning the blueprint so that your number of chakras and energy fields actually change, so that you go from 9 to 8, and that may be another discussion that people might want to have at some point. But in any case, that's the repatterning. And then once that begins to happen, you go into about a 9-month cycle. We call it a gestation cycle, during which this repatterning and recharging occur, and that's where you begin to see changes. And it could have, you might start to see changes early on. It might come after a month, it might come after 5 months. There's a big event that happens at the 5-month mark in this work, and that marks a very big transition for a lot of people. In terms of what we see, it is so impossible to answer that question because the process is super individualized.
yeah.
But I could give some general parameters. It appears that people do a lot of detoxing. They release a lot of toxins. And that would be, and one of my theories would be that they are increasing the amount of torsion energy that's coming through their DNA into their cells, and it's kicking a bunch of cellular debris out into the system. I also think that this process helps crystallize, or maybe that's not the right word, but helps configure the molecular water around our DNA into a more stabilized, coherent form. And that's very supportive. And it's also supportive of detoxification. So those are two physical things that appear to be going on with this work. And you get this kind of releasing of a lot of deeply held toxins. At the same time, people go through any number of they tend to go through any number of mental, emotional, and spiritual types of shifts that sometimes are related to the physical shifts. They might release a bunch of something and all of a sudden be a lot clearer in their thought process, and suddenly their life begins to take a different turn.
Mm, beautiful. Walter Russell, have you ever read any of Walter Russell stuff?
Sure.
Yeah, he was also a big proponent of looking at the energy behind energy and the interfaces between that.
Right. Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, the thing where I run around with Walter Russell typically is that he was totally focused on light, or 90+%, and he sort of ignored the sound component. And for me, that's the inverse. That the sound comes first and then the light comes second. So the sound is much more important than the light, and it is where the power comes from. It's like William Gray in The Talking Tree looking at the Hebrew language and saying that, the vowels put the soul into the words. I mean, the sound, is really coming from the power, or the soul is coming from the sound component of this healing work.
Beautiful. We also on the series had the scientist who spent 5 decades with water technology, And he gave a really beautiful example of how water actually holds memory, and it is through almost like geometrical structures that kind of look like a honeycomb, and they kind of slide a little bit, and it allows information to be stored in the water. And this is kind of the similar thing of what we're talking about right now, of how repatterning happens. You can repattern with your consciousness into cellular structures to create a new types of energetic fields.
It's funny that you say that. I just interviewed Dr. Andrew Kaufman recently. He's doing a lot on the science of water, and we talked about a lot of related topics in the last half hour or so of our discussion. And something I've actually never shared publicly is a thought that I've had for a very long time. Let me just break it down as simply as possible. The reason I haven't put it out is that I made a series of decisions early on with this very complex material that I wanted to make it approachable. I wanted to make it approachable for people. I wanted people to be able to actually wrap their minds around the general concept and implement it so that they could change their lives, as opposed to writing a book for academics or other people in the field or whatever. I really wanted to write this for just a normal person sincerely wanting to change their life. And that was really the inspiration behind Potentiate Your DNA. So I didn't go into the very real possibility that you might be using a kind of emoto effect as you're speaking to the DNA to first speak to the water. And then
Mhm.
the water speaks to the DNA, then the DNA speaks to the energy field, and then that makes a big circle and comes back around through the DNA into the water and into the body.
Yep.
So that's probably how it's working at a more accurate level.
Yeah. And I think that's why people are able to um, access, we'll say, Akashic memory through genetics. It might actually be happening through the connection of water with space-time memory. So,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we could talk about what the Akashic is. I mean, I like to think of it as a kind of morphic data bank, that we can tap into for a lot of different purposes. I also think there's a whole realm beyond the Akashic record that
yeah.
exists. It's like I'm in the process of reissuing my first book that I ever wrote, a novel called Beginner's Luke, and he gets stoned in one of the episodes, and he's lying in the sun in this weird nudist camp, and he's like, what, I was lying there asking myself idle questions such as, why do hippies have such big feet, and where are the records of all the things that never happened? So that's the realm beyond the Akashic. That's where I actually believe regenetics came from, because it was a new introduction into the system from outside the Akashic.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I love that. And I I love the expansiveness of that, because it allows us to let go of Akashic memory and to move into what's next. What,
Yeah, right. What can we bring through
yeah,
to alter the balance of power in the Akashic, for
yeah,
example?
absolutely, absolutely.
Because there are people who feel like the Akashic is a kind of holding tank or even a kind of prison of the mind. So it's not necessarily just a positive thing always.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we allow ourselves to, I kind of call it having a liquid mind, where we are able to understand concepts and structures, but we are also able to create through them, or with them, into something else. So that it's like, when we walk up to a situation where we have never done something before, and all of that fear starts kicking up, there's this line, right, that says basically your mind and your body says that I have no data for what's about to happen next, right, because it's a new experience. And so that new experience, if when we walk past that, becomes an actualization in the body. And that's kind of like how I kind of feel um our every moment should be. It should be kind of like this like nothing came before this moment. This
Oh,
is
I
the
really like that.
this is the now moment. Like whatever happened back there doesn't fucking matter anymore.
Oh, I like it. I like it.
There's pure consciousness in this moment of pure choice to create something new for
Do you
our
know that is fascinating? What came to me as you were talking, and I've never thought about this before, but it's almost like I'm in this Luke novel right now. So he's on the adventure. He's living the adventure. It's an imaginary life that he's creating for himself, right? And so each step forward into his life is what you're describing because he is inventing it all as he goes along.
right.
And I was thinking about things like how we store experience in our body. And very often we do so in the form of trauma, right? Especially
Absolutely.
when we have a kind of freaky experience that we're not prepared for, right? But what you're describing is a kind of brave way of living in the imagination or in the perceptions. And the phrase that popped into my mind for that is the postponement of trauma. So
Mhm.
if you keep postponing the traumatic response and you just keep walking forward, then life kind of opens up in front of you and it blossoms.
That's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. Because I think that the patterns and the programs and the trauma are the structures of, we'll say, like the holographic energetic overlays that people are having issues walking through. That it's like literally like an energetic overlay of a certain thought system, whether it be, a role of mother, or a business person, or cultural identity, or whatever it is. It's still just a role of a thought process that's gaining momentum, that has an energy field around us. And if we can walk past that into something new without that, then we truly have the opportunity to be free.
Yeah, beautifully stated. Yeah, I can't one up that.
So where do you see Regenix going right now? Because things are always changing and evolving, and we are uh we're becoming healed. I'm gonna say that uh, I I'm healed, and I live my life. I create my life from a healed place. And so where is Regenix in healed, in whole, in thriving, in creating their divinity?
Yeah, well, so I like to call it regenetics because we're missing a syllable in there. But let's see. That's a very, very good question. Um, well, I've said repeatedly over the years that if this work is successful, then it will put itself out of business. So,
Yes.
yeah, absolutely. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that there are multiple layers to this work, and where I see a kind of bifurcation happening, and I see a lot of people who are going into a kind of cult-like mentality, and a lot of that is related to what we've been through over the last 2.5 years, and they've lost any ability to do critical thinking or use self-preservation skills or anything like that. And
Being
I think
coherent
I
with
think I'm sorry.
being coherent with others, like they can't even be like sit with people. Like there's this awkward distancing thing, like I don't know where I belong anymore spatially to other people.
Right, right. And I have some theories on maybe what could be driving that, but I would say for the time being, those people are a lost cause. And the other group of people is people who are really embracing the opportunity of this crisis, that whole breakdown, breakthrough dynamic. And people, just because they have no other choice in many instances, are searching and looking for truth, looking for answers, and that kind of thing. So there is a massive wave of people who are coming into the the realms of energy healing and DNA activation, looking for help, really, and overcoming maybe their own trauma, their own fear, illnesses, whatever. Or even things like they got jabbed. I have an entire article on this subject called "Immunize Yourself Against Vaccination Damage." It's like using energy to help you overcome the fallout from whatever these things are they're sticking in people's arms. So I still see that there is an enormous amount of work to do in terms of helping people and that kind of thing. And I expect that this type of work will probably be being shared for a very long time, maybe even after I'm gone. I certainly would like to think that we'll collectively ascend before then, but I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I write about these things a lot. I mean, I wrote about that in my novel Snooze, which is also about Dewey Larson stuff. I wrote about that in my last book, Callie the Destroyer, from a kind of Gnostic perspective. But I really don't have any firm grasp on where all this is going. I'm trying to figure it out like everyone else. But I will say that because there are multiple levels to regenetics, it gives people a lot to work with. You've got 4 primary activations in the main method, and then there's a series of songs that one can do to fortify the glands and organ systems that can be beneficial to some people. And there's also a microbiome boost to help people with their gut health, who because that's very, very much under assault right now with all the toxic load and the jabs and that kind of thing. So there's a lot for people to tap into, and a lot of, I would say, related areas to tap into, like, lifestyle choices and allowing yourself to live a little bit, and stepping outside of traditional ways of looking at things, or even alternative ways of looking things. I feel like there's just a tendency in the health community to be very rigid and almost fundamentalist in the health way. And I think a lot of people, they improve when they let go of some of those sort of tight-assed ways of doing things.
Mhm.
So, I have a forum, people come on there, we talk about a lot of subjects like this,
Yeah.
you know.
I think people have an issue with the distinction between discipline and control.
Yeah, I agree with that. They're also terrified of, taking some toxin into their body and
Oh,
getting
yeah.
worse from it, so that they tend to really monitor what they're eating and drinking to an extreme.
Mhm.
I'm not saying to go out and just junk out, but I'm saying you have to live. You
Yeah.
absolutely have to live. And one of the things that we see with regenetics is that people tend to get stronger. They
Yeah.
tend to get more capable of having a beer or something like that, and letting that be okay, or having, my God, some gluten. Oh my gosh, that's crazy. But it happens, and people are like, well, it didn't really bother me that much, or I thought it was going to blow me out of the water, and I felt a little funky the next day, but and several months ago it would have put me in bed for the week. It's just
Yeah.
not happening anymore.
As a child, I have a memory of after my birth of being vaccinated right at the hospital, and
Oh wow.
I remember the room being very bright, and I remember the room starting to dull after the vaccination, and I attribute that to all my health issues that I had throughout my whole life until I healed them. And one of the things that I needed to do was to go back and rewrite that memory and to consciously purge that out of my system. And um, that that such a precious time of when a soul is actually coming into the body to do that creates a distortion field of connection for the soul to truly become embodied. And then you have all kinds of we'll say lower chakral issues, digestion, just all kinds of stuff starts happening in the gut flora. Of course can't um, thrive there. The good bacteria can't thrive there because of these what's in these vaccinations for children. And then there's another round of energetics that start happening when the gut flora isn't able to be in coherence with the body and the mind. And then there's just it's just a domino effect of energetic loops that keep happening from that. And your work is much needed, and working with DNA from these vaccination um, um, insertions, we'll say, are so needed at this time.
Another thing that's going on with the gut flora is you're supposed to actually break free loose hydrogen at the end of your digestive process, and that's Brown's gas, basically, that I'm sure you're aware of. And it just isn't happening anymore, and that's like a macronutrient. It makes up about 62% of our nutrient profile if you look at it. I think it's by volume. So, here we are just not getting the most important nutrient in our diets whatsoever. So, when you can begin to break down the food properly, you can add a lot of firepower to your ability to heal and even regenerate.
Absolutely. I have a whole module in a course that's about hydrogen, and hydrogen with the body, hydrogen with how it builds the structures of DNA and how important it is, and then also just how important our relationship to elements in general is important, and to really understand what elements are and how they're a part of our biosphere, our
Mm.
energetic biosphere and our conscious biosphere of how we're creating. And they're part of how we absorb nutrients, how we create. There are certain metals that we're supposed to have in our body because they're part of conductive properties for us to be able to create and have longevity with our life, and to be able to be super conductive as like a conscious source field.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I have a whole segment on things like the noble gases and conscious healing, and how important those are, and some of their more esoteric, I don't know, components, let us say.
Wonderful. Oh, it's so wonderful to talk with you. I love this.
Yeah, I'm learning a lot. It's like, okay, I need to go look into this thing and that thing.
So, again, like where do you see your work going? If we're coming from a healed place, what is the transformation of consciousness through genetics?
Yeah, I just don't think we're in a healed place. I'm just seeing lots of unhealedness. And, there's that saying, heal yourself and heal the world. Well, the world is clearly not healed, and people are clearly not healed in my way of looking at things. So I think there's a lot of getting the word out to be done. I just released the Spanish edition of Potentiate Your DNA. The French edition is about to
Great.
come out. So it's just getting people into kind of a self-healing mode and getting them sharing this type of technology so that we can maybe create a kind of 100th monkey effect or a morphic moment where we suddenly do heal, maybe as a collective. But I think there's a lot of really, really weird things going on,
Oh yeah.
that have to do with, I mean, I look at the Archon question, for example, in Kali the Destroyer, and what's being done to the earth, to the goddess, thus to us and our relationship to the earth. You could look at the microbiome problem in relationship to this question, or this optic. So there's many, many things going on that are far from being in control, in my estimation. But I believe that we can prevail, and we can enter more of a golden age. So I'm doing my best to contribute to that, while we're really looking at, I mean, I have a kind of twin focus. One of the things that often happens with regenetics is a process that Lee and I like to call watching the movie. And very often this happens after the second activation, which is called articulation. The first activation is potentiation, and then you do articulation. And when you're watching the movie, you are kind of in but not of your life. And
Mhm.
so you can be in it and have a kind of I am healed mentality. You can use Neville Goddardian techniques for using your human imagination to heal yourself. You can go there and you can really be in that space while acknowledging the other thing that's going on, which is all of this unhealed stuff is still there too. It's almost like they're coexisting. It reminds me of the kind of overlapping or conflation of time, space, and space time. They're both happening at the same
Right.
time.
Yeah. And it's like I think that that heal perspective is not just watching the movie, but it's watching the movie of the movie, or watching several movies of the movie.
And that's metagenetics, that's non-local medicine, that is looking into source to really manifest a new reality because you asked it to,
Absolutely.
and you just have to know that you asked it to. So given enough time, it will manifest that for you. In the meantime, you can go, have a nice glass of wine or something.
So, what would you like to just share a little bit of the sound vibrations that you use for Regenics?
Not particularly, if that's okay. I
No,
don't like doing that. I don't I've sort of stayed away from doing anything in recording form. I really believe that that's a kind of bastardization of the energy, to do that. I've certainly never put that out there. Other people have done it. You can probably YouTube it and hear some of it, but it's not something that I really support.
I totally respect that.
Mhm.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, do you have any last words for people that you'd like to share that you feel is like really important right now?
Oh goodness. Yeah, I would say that I've got a couple of blogs that I share a lot of interesting information. One is snooze2awaken.com, and then I'm also at solluckman.substack.com. And I post a lot of information relative to health across a variety of topics. And I also am going through my own learning curve with a lot of information having to do with real history, ancient history, or not so ancient history, things like Tartaria and energy technologies and the relationship to the earth and what might actually be going on with this archontic question, and who the colonizer parasites are and all of that kind of thing. So I am sharing some of that as I go forward. And you can sort of tap into that if this is of interest to you in those venues. I'm also about to put out a webinar. It's a private webinar where I do teach some of the work. I do teach people how to do potentiation, and I give some examples of how you might put together the sounds and that kind of thing. And so I will sing a line here or a line there of what the activations actually sound like. And so that's a big step for me, putting that out there in a non-public way. There's a paywall for that part of what I'm doing. But I'm wanting to make that available for what you might spend on Netflix for a month. So
Beautiful. I love that what you're putting out, and you do put out a lot of health information that I feel is very important for this time right now. And I saw the series that you put out about Tartaria, the videos that you put out, and I haven't had time to watch them, but I really look forward to it. So
yeah, well, thanks for checking that out. I mean, it is a really serious rabbit hole.
yeah,
So
it
it's
looked like it. I was like, I don't have time for this right now, because I could feel the energy of it. I was just like, oh, we're gonna have to
no, it's really crazy, and I've
set a
been
weekend for that.
there's a whole channel that I'm going to be sharing some more stuff from, but it's a lot of it is actually supportive of a lot of my research, and been very interested to see that connection. And then some of it challenges some of the research and some of where I'm coming from, and I'm trying to think like, well, okay, how do I how do I put these things together?
Yeah. Well, I think that's beautiful that you're even willing to look at information that challenges your own research. A lot of people aren't. They've kind of made up their mind and like that's it. Whereas like, when we have an open mind, you're always looking at different information, because it's really the point of the consciousness that comes in and if it makes it valid or not valid, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
and you might have done something that you had some theoretical snafus with, but the work itself is still valid. And I believe that may be what I'm looking at here is just certain underpinnings might not be what I thought they were, but the work is still very helpful to people. And I hope to maybe clarify where I'm coming from with that at some point. But right now I'm just learning. I'm just really opening myself up to, to being wrong and in certain areas, and also patting myself on the back for being right in some other areas.
That's beautiful. I think that there is really nothing more beautiful than being open to constantly be learning and experiencing, because
Well, it seems like
that's
you're that way very much. I mean, I
you
can see
see
your
that
interest.
thriving.
Yeah, right. I know, otherwise it's just so boring. Who wants to be bored moving forward? We live in a wonderful time in some ways because there's so much to learn, and it's so just at our fingertips if we're just willing to follow our noses.
Absolutely. And you also have a free gift for everyone. Would you like to?
Is that Potentiate Your DNA?
Yeah, it's the ebook.
Yes. And I wanted to ask you maybe for clarification on how to offer that. I was going to maybe put a download link or something like that off of my website.
Yep, you can
Uh,
go ahead and do that, and then send me the link, and I'll put it in with all of your bio and the video when it goes out on the day, and it'll be right there so people can come and visit what you've got going on.
and do you know which day this will be appearing so that I can put that out in my mailer? Do you know that offhand, or maybe you could send that to me?
I will send it to you. Yeah, I have everybody's date, and I don't know what it is right now, but I will definitely send it to you.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, I will definitely share this around with my network in a few different ways.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And so it was so great to finally connect, and I really appreciate what you're doing, and I really appreciate um the stand that you're taking and the hard evidence that you're putting forward. And it's so important at this time.
Well, I appreciate that. Well, I'm really intrigued by your whole world, and I look forward to learning more about what you're up to.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us, everyone. I hope this served you in some way in your life. So much love to you. Bye-bye.